Welcome to Freedom Window. I am the political ref. Today we'll be looking at Pennsylvania. My spreadsheet is complete. And first we'll begin with the polling. Right now the pollsters are saying Biden is up 6. I think he's up 2. This largely comes down to voter turnout assumption differences based on a lot of factors. You can go to my website, click on Pennsylvania, read through that. The charts here, the pollsters have shown Biden ahead for a while. I've shown him ahead as well. I don't think I've ever had Trump leading in Pennsylvania. But again, this is a pollster-based analysis. There's not much I can do with just the polls. I have to have more data, which we have now. But first, we're going to glance through the polls here. The most recent polls, Insider Advantage has Biden up 3. SurveyMonkey, which I understand is not a methodologically sound pollster, but they're consistently pro-Democrat, which is why I will occasionally use them because they're consistent, with adjustments, of course. Trafalgar Group shows Biden up 2. Whitman Insights, Biden up 5. I make these adjustments here. Again, I encourage you to go to my website, look through the adjustments. You scroll down to the lower section of the page, and each adjustment is explained so that you're not just left hanging wondering why I made these adjustments. Now, one interesting point about the polling. In the polls, we see that independents have been splitting evenly lately between Biden and Trump. There's a 40-38 split with the Great Lakes poll. Emerson poll shows a 50-40 split pro-Trump, actually, so Trump won by 10 on that one. But then you have the Monmouth poll, which, I'll tell you what I think of Monmouth some other time, but it's not good. Shows Biden up 12. So there we have an even split. It's fair to assume that independents are likely to split in Pennsylvania. The higher the turnout among independents, the more likely they are to go towards Democrats. But it doesn't look good for independent turnout this time. So we've seen the polls. Biden up 6 according to the pollsters, up 2 according to me. Now let's go look at some real data. Here we have, I guess before we look at real data, just a few more polls. I took 4 polls which asked the question, the Great Lakes poll, YouGov, New York Times, and Fox News, to estimate early turnout. The early turnout estimate among an average of polls showed 50% for Democrats would vote early. With the lower two on that end were 45% each, New York Times, Fox News. And for Republicans, the estimate was that it would be 19%. Lower ends there, Fox News, New York Times, 18%, 40%, average that out to 16%. So the lower ends would be 45% and 16%. The higher ends would be 19% and 50%. Those are important because those greatly influence my spreadsheet. Now, on to the spreadsheet. All right, here we go. Right now, the consensus among analysts is that Biden is doing well in the early count. So here's the early count, the raw return numbers. Biden has about a 400,000 vote lead. That is not the number we should be looking at. This is the number we should be looking at, the requested mail ballots. Why? Because this is an incomplete number. Let me demonstrate. Let's go to the map of the early vote. Here we have the mail ballot return rates in Pennsylvania. The 2 big ones for the Democrats are Philadelphia County and Allegheny County. Cities being Pittsburgh and Philadelphia. These are the 2 biggest treasure troves of votes for the Democrats in the state. For sure. Philadelphia County has a 42% return rate for their early vote. That is votes already returned. And Allegheny County has a 51% return rate. Where does that rank within the state? Well, let's scroll down and take a look. Allegheny County is on the first page, and they are ranked number 6 in terms of return rate. 50.6%. That's very high. Philadelphia County is on the next page, ranking number 13 at 41.9%. So we can see we're right there. If you look at mail ballots returned total, the top two counties are, of course, Allegheny and Philadelphia counties. Combining their totals, that is 100, that is a combined total, I should have done this math already, 350,000, it's about 345,000 total votes. Most of those are going to be Democratic votes. Not all, most. Back to the chart. The difference between this number and this number is a little under 400,000. Allegheny and Philadelphia County are most of that number. The reason this is relevant is because Allegheny and Philadelphia counties, I lived in Pennsylvania for a while, grew up in Delaware, know the state well. This is Democrat machine states. Okay. The T of Pennsylvania, right here, this is Trump country. Most of the state geographically, all right? There's a couple exceptions. Center County is pretty blue county. That's where Penn State is. You have Dauphin County. That's where the state capital is. It's pretty Democratic. That's why you see the high return rate. But if you run through these rural counties, the return rate is lower. I guess with a couple of exceptions, but these are small counties. These numbers are going to creep up over time. They haven't been organized like the two big Democratic counties. These people are doing it on their own pace. They'll get it done. How do I know they'll get it done? Because Republicans vote at a higher rate than Democrats. In 2016, 61% of Democrats voted in the election. 72% of Republicans voted in the election. So it's a fair assumption that Republicans are going to vote at least at an even turnout rate to Democrats. What does that tell you? That tells you that this number is what matters. Because Republicans are going to get out, they're going to vote. If they've requested the ballot, they're going to vote at least at an equal rate to Democrats. Now, come down here to the request early ballot ratio. This number, requested ballots, determines this number. What I'm doing is I'm taking the polling estimates of 19% early turnout for Republicans, if you recall the polls, 50% early turnout for Democrats. Just a quick reminder of what I'm talking about. This chart here, the average of the poll estimates for early turnout. That's what we're talking about. So if you take the poll numbers and estimate that 19% of Republicans will vote early, and we look at how many have requested, interestingly, it's 19.3% of all Republicans have requested an early ballot. That leads to a number of 1 on the request early ballot ratio. That's a perfect score. Perfect score of 1 means you've hit your poll estimate exactly in terms of early vote. Democrats, 1.75 million have requested. That's only 42% of their total registered. Therefore, they have not hit their 50% number, giving them a 0.8 request early ballot ratio. Extrapolate that number down to, before we do that, this early ballot ratio is essentially an estimate of what turnout is going to be in 2020. That's what it is, based on the hard numbers that are coming back. We go down to election day vote. We apply that ratio that we just showed you, 1 for Republicans, 0.8 for Democrats. We apply it to what we think the actual vote's going to be. Now, I'm estimating that Democrats will get their turnout up by 15%. And I'm estimating that the Republicans will get their turnout up by only 5% because they were much higher last time. So Republicans will go from 72 to 77. Democrats will go from 61 to 76% turnout. What is essentially almost an even turnout. In theory, right? It's part of the calculations. It's a little complicated. But then I'm applying the early turnout ratio, which is, as of right now, it is 1 for Republicans and it is 0.8 for Democrats because, again, the requested mail ballots number. Doing the math, applying it both to the early vote and to the day of vote, as of right now, I estimate that the Republicans will outnumber Democrats by almost 300,000 votes. Now, you're going to say, wait a minute, these numbers don't add up to the total number that's going to vote in Pennsylvania. That's correct. And it will eventually, once these numbers have completed. And people are still requesting early ballots, and they will continue to do so for the next week and a half. So over the next week and a half, these numbers will creep up. And as these numbers creep up, let's put this at 2 million, just to show you what I mean. Boom, 2 million. There we have request early ballot ratio for the Democrats is now hitting 1. Republicans, let's say they increase by an additional 130,000 to 800,000 over the next 10 days. That bumps them up to 1.2 ratio. Again, that's well above the 19% estimate in the polls, which means they're turning out at a higher rate than the polls are estimating. Where does that put us? That actually puts Republicans at a higher turnout than what I estimated before. What are the possible flaws in my calculation? Of course, we're going to look at that. Let's assume that 50% was too high. Let's assume the New York Times and Fox News were right. 45% of Democrats should be estimated to turn out, and only 16% of Republicans. In that case, the ratio right now for Democrats is 0.9, and for Republicans is 1.2. Extrapolated out to the spreadsheet, Republicans still outnumber Democrats by a fairly large margin. So let's just assume, worst case scenario from my calculations, that the Republicans should be at 19% and the Democrats should be at 45%. Well, that brings the two ratios pretty close together. Where does that leave us? Extremely close turnout. But Republicans are still on the upper side. What is the lesson to take from this? Bottom line, this number is very important. The number of requested mail ballots is very important because it tells us how the electorate actually looks as compared to the polls. The polls have been assuming a massive Democratic wave. And I'm giving them the benefit of the doubt with respect to that. I'm giving them their Democratic wave. But even with the potential Democratic wave, you apply what we're actually seeing on the ground, and it doesn't look good for the Democrats. Now, this could happen. This could easily happen. Maybe this 19% is the right number for Republicans, and maybe 45% is the right number for Democrats. Okay? That's fine. We'll just have to wait and see. But I think it's fair to conclude, based on the early numbers that we're seeing, Pennsylvania is not a +6 state for Democrats. It's pretty much a dead heat. And then you have to say, look at the fundamentals on the ground. Joe Biden is hiding in his basement again because of all these allegations. And I don't expect him to come out and do a bunch of big rallies in Pennsylvania. Donald Trump is going to be living in Pennsylvania. He'll be there every other day. He'll be all over the T of Pennsylvania. He'll be in the suburbs. He's going to drive his turnout. As of right now, I think Donald Trump has the edge in Pennsylvania.